So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Carol, and away we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you also to the League of Women Voters and the library for hosting these candidate forums. They're very important to the election process, so I appreciate all the candidates, and I also appreciate the good audience turnout that we've had. We'll be asking questions to the candidates that are here. If you've been following the election cycle, you'll notice that not every candidate is here. The League of Women Voters has decided to give the candidates who are not here an opportunity to have statements read representing their position. I will read those at the end of the evening. Those statements will be limited to 2 minutes, just like the 2 minutes that all of the candidates that are here are being allowed to state their position. As far as timing goes, the first question you'll be asked is, who are you and why are you running? You'll have 2 minutes to give the audience an idea of what that is. Then every question thereafter, unless I say something different, will give you a minute to answer. We have 2 timepieces for you to pay attention to. The yellow one is going to get waved at you after 45 seconds. At 15 seconds, you'll get the red one, and I will say your time is up. I'm very strict about that, so don't be surprised if I shut you down in mid-sentence. Okay, that said, the first question. 45 and then 1 minute. Okay. The first question, and I'll also rotate as we go down to let people start, each have an opportunity to answer the question first to try to give you an idea to say something that someone else may not say. Starting with Mr. Gray, welcome.
Yes.
Please tell us about yourself and why you're running for the Wyoming Legislature.
I'm Chuck Gray. I'm running for the Wyoming Legislature because I'm very concerned about the direction of our state. My opponent, who's not here tonight, Mr. Lockhart, he's been in office since the year 2000, and I believe it's time for new blood. Spending has tripled during his time in office. He's voted for all those budgets. Many of those budgets, the 2004 and 2006 bienniums, were budgets where the governor's initial request was increased, which is usually not the way the legislative process works. Once the general fund surplus that we had began to run out, they passed a 10-cent per gallon increase in the gas tax, which I think is wrong. We can run the state off of current revenues. I think it was wrong to do that. My opponent also voted for SF 104, which I think is wrong. I think we should not be using any means to get the ends that we want. And that's the first step in the direction towards increased government. I'm a small business person. I see the effects of regulation every day. And I want to get government right-sized in the state of Wyoming rather than move the direction of Washington, which is too much government.
Really, he got 2 minutes. So if you have anything additional, the first statement is 2 minutes. So if you've got another minute you want to add in, that's fine.
Oh, yeah, I could talk forever.
No, not forever, just 1 more minute.
I'm very concerned about the Common Core standards. The needs of a student in Philadelphia are different from those in Casper, Wyoming. And I was just talking with a 4th grade mother the other day. Her 4th grade son is being forced to go back to a 2nd grade reading level because of one-size-fits-all standards. That's wrong. I want us to get out of the Common Core. I believe passionately in that. And I just think it's time to right-size government here in Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, again, tell us about yourself and why you're running for the Wyoming Legislature.
Well, thank you, Carol. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm a candidate for House District 36. And very succinctly put, the reason I'm running for this office is that I want to bring a little bit of common sense back to Cheyenne. Now, we've seen creeping into our state in the last couple of years this kind of divisive, kind of vitriolic political maneuvering that you see in Washington, D.C., and that's not the way Wyoming does business. We need legislators that are elected that are going to go down to Cheyenne, they're going to roll their sleeves up, and they're going to say, I don't care if you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, I don't care what planet you're from, but we're going to sit down and we're going to address the issues that are facing our state. And it's only through this collaboration, through this cooperative process that we're going to be able to address the issues that are facing our state. And I think there are a number of issues facing our state. For one, we've continued to put lots and lots of money into the rainy day account, yet we have roads and bridges that are crumbling. We have infrastructure needs that need to be met. We need to have that discussion as to, is this the best way to be spending our money? We need to take education and we need to put the children first. We need to take politics and ideology out of that process. We've had standards in this state since 1977, and I believe, or at least the late 1970s. And the last I looked, 2 + 2 = 4, whether it's in New Jersey or in Wyoming, okay? So our students need to be able to compete, whether it's in Wyoming, nationally, or internationally. And so we need to use some common sense on what we're doing. Of course, the curriculum is going to stay controlled locally. It's in our Constitution, but we need to have a standard that's going to bring our students up to the level they're going to be able to compete with anyone. Our coal industry is under fire. We've got lots of people that work in that industry that depend on it. We need to support that industry, look for solutions. The list goes on, but regardless of the issue, I'm going to bring common sense, hard work, and a collaborative attitude to Cheyenne.
Thank you. Mrs. Longtine.
Yes.
Ms.
Or
Longtine.
Ms.
Ms.
There is no Mr. I'm Laurie Longtine, and I'm running for House District 59. And it's hard to improve upon what Eric said. Politics has always been a passion in my family, going back to when my Father Raymond Corbett was in the legislature down in Cheyenne and helped bring Casper College to Casper. And so it's very important to me and my family how we do things here in Wyoming. And lately, as Eric has said, we have been letting politics and ideology trump common sense and reason. I don't remember if it was Mark Twain or who, but someone said, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. Unfortunately, opinions and facts have been getting seriously confused in Cheyenne, and a little bit of reason and common sense needs to be brought back. It is my profound hope that this message can get out to the voters of Natrona County, and in particular, House District 59. In my district, we have a great divide between the haves and the have-nots. There are some very wealthy people in my district, and there are also some people who are really struggling to make it, and their needs are not addressed. I would say that my district is composed of primarily hardworking, blue-collar kind of people. And frequently in Wyoming, hardworking, blue-collar kind of people get left behind. It would be my sincere hope that if I were sent to Cheyenne, I could speak up for those people.
Thank you. Mr. Opella.
Good evening, and thanks for having us here tonight. I am running on my experience as a businessman, as a former city councilman, as a former county commissioner, as a former highway commissioner. I don't have any great burning desire to go to Cheyenne to fight with anybody. I have no desire to bring up any great legislative issues, but I would like to go down there and get some stuff done. I believe in our road system because of my experience on the Highway Commission. I think it's very critical to our state that we maintain the roads. So as far as the gas tax, I think it was something that nobody likes, but I think it was something that was necessary. And it's probably even going to be more so in the future. I believe water is going to be another big issue that I'd like to go down there and tackle because it was my experience on the Regional Water Board. When I was on there, we tried to get as much water rights that we could gain, and I think there's going to be a big fight in the West, as you've already seen this Colorado Compact coming through, where people want to come and steal water. And we're a pretty good target. We don't have a lot of population. We don't have a lot of political pull in the Senate. So I think issues like that are going to be very critical. Again, the only reason I'm going is based on my experience and trying to get something done. I'm not down there to fight with people. I want something done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walters.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being here this evening. My name is Tom Walters. I'm currently the representative from House District 38, and I'm running for that seat again. I was born in Powell, Wyoming, moved to Casper when I was just months old. My parents moved down to Casper. I've lived here ever since. I graduated from Kelly Walsh, then went to the University of Wyoming where I graduated, and I'm currently a ranch manager on a cattle ranch south of Casper. I'm running because Wyoming is who I am and what raised me. Wyoming raised me. I love Wyoming, and I want to continue to see Wyoming grow and prosper as it has for the last many, many years. I've also been in Wyoming long enough to watch it have its boom and bust cycles. And I'm really impressed by the way the legislature in the last 10 or 12 years has done such an excellent job of saving money and putting money aside in our Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, in our Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, and all of those accounts so that when the times do slow down in Wyoming, which I know they're going to at some point, that Wyoming will be situated in a great position so that we have money in the bank and we can still continue to operate and provide our citizens with a great quality of life, even though the state may be struggling at that point in time. So I continue to work at that. In the first 2 years of my term, that was one of my focuses, to make sure that we were continuing to save for future uses. The severance taxes and things like that come from our mineral industry, and those minerals are extracted just once. But that money being in savings gets to be used many times over, as compound interest is a wonderful thing when it works for you. I also like to work hard to try and limit regulation. Regulation does stymie growth in the private sector as well as any other place, so try to limit regulation. I'm not down there with one agenda trying to stop one thing or promote another thing. I'm there to work for all the people of the state of Wyoming, and as I said, I'd like to ask for your vote on August 19th and again in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Linn?
Thank you. Thank you for once again hosting a candidate forum. And welcome back, those of you who were up here last time I was here. I'm Rae Linn, and I am from South Dakota originally. I have a proud heritage as a descendant of homesteaders who came out to South Dakota in a covered wagon from Illinois after immigrating from Scotland, and they came to South Dakota in a covered wagon in 1883 with their rifles, and they had to patrol for Indians at that time. My great-uncle Frank tells the story about his grandfather, who was the one who came out with his dad. And my great-uncle Frank was a two-term congressman from South Dakota. He continues to be a resource to me, and interestingly enough, he's a Democrat, like a couple of the people down the table from me. So I come from a long line of Democrats, but I, at the age of 18, being the independent person that I am, decided that that was not the party for me. I'm a very strong conservative. I believe in strong conservative fiscal policy, as well as being very conservative on social issues, which isn't always that easy to do when you're a woman. Some people think that, all women have the same issues and women's issues are defined across the board in the same way. And that really irritates me to hear that. That is not the way it is for all women, and nobody speaks for all women. Women have come a long way since we had our first female governor in the state of Wyoming, and I'm here to be a leader as a woman and to show you the new generation of female political leaders. I've always had an interest in politics. I was voted Girl State Governor of my state when I was in high school. I can't get away from talk radio and the politics that are talked all the time, and in 2012 I just had to get involved because my husband was getting tired of being the only one who had to listen to me all the time. So I became a precinct committee woman. I've been to the state convention twice as a delegate, and I think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for Wyoming politics to improve. I do agree with what's been said about that. I think that even within the Republican Party, we have a lot that we could do to become more diverse.
You're out of time.
Thank you.
Mr. Flesvig.
Yes, my name's Greg Flesvig. I'm a 10-year resident of Casper. I have a wife and 3 children, and I'm running just to oppose my opponent. He voted consistently with Common Core measures. SF 104, it's not lost on anyone. He had not only authored it, he ushered it right on through to get an unconstitutional law on the books. It was ruled unconstitutional, and I'm all for liberty and freedom, and if you violate the Constitution, I take umbrage with that. So he also voted consistent with gasoline tax. I mean, with the economy the way it is now, it's just the wrong time for that, and there's too much spending that's unaccounted for in that. Honestly, I'm not the no person that you might think I am, but been knocking on doors, and I've been listening to people, and they're really resounding with me, resonating. It's good to hear. There's a lot of good people out there, and I'd just be happy to represent the people of House District 37 and listen to their wants and needs, and put all my interests aside and just do what's right down in Cheyenne. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Hi, I'm Pam Brown, and I'm running for House District 36. I decided to run because I see a big need for our schools to improve. I have 3 grown kids, but now I have 7 grandkids that are going through school. And I've seen this Common Core, it really needs to go because it is not helping our children at all. It is making them stupid, really. It is. And all the standardized tests we have to do, they're teaching to test, not teaching to learn. So the kids don't know anything. I'll be watching TV. We like to watch the History Channel, me and my granddaughter. And something will come up and she'll say, well, who's that or what's that about? And I'm like, what are they teaching you guys in school these days? And she does not know. She has not had science for 3 years and she's going into the 6th grade. She has not had history ever. So there's something that really needs to be done with our schools. And I also want to help the energy industry, which is being attacked by the politics in Washington, D.C. We need to get our gas leases that have already been authorized, released to so they can start their drilling. We need to work on keeping our coal industry going because they are really under attack right now. And they're attacking us about our gun rights, which is something that I feel very strongly about, that we have the right to bear arms to protect ourselves. And if we take away their good people's guns, only the outlaws will have guns. And I just want to be the voice of the working person. I'm not a politician, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just an average person out there who wants to do what's best for Wyoming because this is the state I love. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now you have a minute to answer the questions. So the yellow plate will be waved at you after 45 seconds. We'll start with you, Ms. Brown. Is state government too big? If so, where would you cut? What would you scale back?
I think we have too many committees to check things out. I mean, they have you decide if something's going to be good or not. You don't need 50 people looking at it for 2 years before they decide if it's a good project or not to do. We need to just get people in there and decide what's best instead of having too many people poking their noses in it. Thank you.
Mr. Flesvig, same question. Is state government too big?
Yes, state government is too big. You can't really whittle it down enough. I'm in favor of across-the-board cut, whatever that may be. It's not the job of the government to provide employment for people. It's the private sector. So there's essential facets of the state government, cops, courts, roads. It goes down the line, but it's all enumerated in the Constitution. And so oftentimes you might overreach on extractive industries and game and fish. We can see that's bloated outside of the scope of what its original intent was for. So there is a lot of places you can do some cutting with. Thank you.
Ms. Linn.
I have a lot to learn about the particulars of our state government and exactly how our budget is put in, in practice. But I think that there are quite a few indications that government over the last 4 and 8 years, 4 especially, has grown considerably. I think it's grown by, I don't remember the percentage. So of course I would question, that growth in such a short amount of time. If we adopt the Common Core standards, then of course there will be a lot more regulations that will come along with that, which will mean we will increase our size of our state government that way as well. And along with the government goodies always come the strings attached. And I was reading something today that said they're projecting that the cost of that nationally will go up from like $8 billion up to 13 point some billion dollars. But I would have to look at that much more closely if I'm elected, and I would be very, very conscientious about that.
Thank you. Mr. Walters, is state government too big? And what would you cut if you think it's too big?
Thank you. Currently, state government is probably right-sized because we're meeting the demands of our citizens. And those demands may not all be the demands of all of you sitting in this room, but as you look at it from a statewide basis, the demands on a statewide basis are being met, and they're being met very well at this point. We are a little bit, on a per capita basis, spend a little bit more than a lot of states do. We do have more people in state government than a lot of states do on a per capita basis. But if you were to also draw that diagram out a little bit larger, we would not grow our government much if our population grew, because we have to provide certain services, and when we are in a low populated state, those services still come about regardless of the number of people. And that is what makes our government look like it might be a little bit larger on a per capita basis than what some folks think is necessary. If it were to come to cuts, I don't know what I would cut at this point, because as I said, I think we're right-sized for the demands of our citizenry.
Thank you. Mr. Opella.
Yes, I would agree with Mr. Walters on this fact. You're going to have services. That's what government does. If you have the right amount of people, you get the work done. Citizens don't like to stand in line at the motor vehicle department. They're very impatient. I've been down in with the county when you have to stand in line down there. People are very impatient. They like to have their services, and they like them. If you want to cut, I suggest you do it very carefully, not big swaths, and just dump a lot of people, maybe do it by attrition. So there's always a chance to cut back somewhere, but you have to look at it carefully. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Well, I find myself in the awkward position of agreeing with the Republican. Mr. Walters and Mr. Opella, because yes, Wyoming government is definitely not too big. That has been a very popular mantra that first gained credence back in the 1980s, but Wyoming, of all the places, with our very limited services and the fact that we put most of our money in savings, I definitely would not say that government is too big. I think some people are confusing spending with the size of the government. Most of you who pay electric bills know that spending goes up over time. A loaf of bread costs more now than it did 30 years ago. So even if I'm still only buying one loaf of bread, it's going to cost more. So yes, government spending will increase over time because of the simple fact of inflation.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Carol. I, too, tend to think that our Wyoming state government is not too large. That's not to say that if elected, we wouldn't always look at every agency's budget and make sure that it was being efficient. However, it's not just efficiency that matters. It's not cost cutting that matters. It's providing services to the people. And that's what government exists for. And to echo my colleagues' sentiments, prices increase, spending increases, but so has our population. Oil and gas drilling has increased. You know, game and fish is a target for a lot of cost-cutting measures, but yet we have sage grouse to deal with. We have endangered species to deal with, and we may not like it, but that's the fact of the matter. And if we don't deal with it, our oil and gas and extractive industries will suffer. So in short, I don't believe it's oversized. I think it's right-sized, and we have to be cognizant to provide the services that the populace needs.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Government is too large in Wyoming. I think it's first important to frame this question in a certain way, which is that if we don't get this under control, the growth of government in Wyoming, we're going to be looking at a revenue gap. Our mineral revenues are projected to level off, and Mr. Opella seemed to suggest even in his intro that he believes that we need potentially more taxes, kind of like the gas tax. I think that's totally wrong. So you need to frame this question in a certain way. What are we looking at if we don't get this under control? I think the best strategy to get this under control is priority-based budgeting. And I talked about this at the last debate, but this is a strategy that has been discussed at certain think tanks where each agency goes to their budget when they make their initial request and prioritize everything they do. So then the legislature is given a list from the agency to describe what they think are the most important things. You fund the most important things first. You don't fund them last. You don't fund highways last, like the strategy that the legislature has seemed to use in the past to create a crisis.
You're out of time.
That's the wrong strategy.
Okay, we'll start this one with Mr. Flesvig, and we'll go this direction again. Wyoming's rainy day fund is in excess of $1.8 billion. Should part of it be spent? What circumstances would convince you to use a portion of the rainy day fund?
Well, first of all, that's power of the purse, and it's in the House of Representatives where that is to be taking place, so very applicable. It's how the people want to be represented, how they want their money spent. The citizens of this state, it's their money. You should lean on your representative and tell them what needs to be spent and how to spend it, if at all. Because I'm not out there to impose anything over the representation of the people. So it's just listening to the constituency, and if and how and when it should be spent, that's how it should be best spent.
Thank you. Ms. Linn, rainy day fund, what would make you spend it?
I think that it is admirable that we have such a large rainy day fund. It does speak well to the foresight and planning of our legislature from the past. However, with that said, I think that there have been times when, even in the last few years, we probably should have considered using rainy day funding. I can remember probably a couple of years ago when the governor was asking for across-the-board cuts from all state agencies, and he asked for cuts in the amount of 6%. And so I was thinking at that time, there are lots of services that are really, really pertinent to people, especially in rural Wyoming, especially having to do with health care. We have people with acute mental health care needs, people who are could potentially be in danger of, really serious consequences from their illnesses. And in those kinds of circumstances, the rainy day fund should come into play. And I think that we were really, really in error at that time.
Thank you. Mr. Walters.
Thank you. The account that you're referring to, just so that everyone in the room understands, is the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. The state has many reserve accounts. There's the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. It has about $8 billion in it. We can only spend the interest off of that. The Legislative Stabilization Account that you're referring to that has $1.8 billion in it, we can spend both interest and the corpus of it if the legislature so chooses. Currently, we spend about 70% of all income that comes into the state of Wyoming, saving about 30% of it. I think that we're spending plenty. And if you look at it from a trend line perspective, the last slowdown in the state of Wyoming lasted about 15 to 20 years. If we want to make it through a 15 to 20 year slowdown and yet maintain all of the services that the citizenry of Wyoming wants to have provided, we need about $3 billion, or a little over $3 billion, in this Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. So it's not raining today. The state is doing very well, and we need to continue saving in that account.
Thank you. Mr. Opella.
Once you raid that account, it becomes a political issue. You're going to have to decide who the money goes to, and once it starts, it'll never stop. There won't be a rainy day account, because once politics are involved, I'm just sorry, that's what's going to happen. Everybody's going to have a special project or something they desperately need. If they need it that bad, then they ought to start talking to the legislature about taking out the general fund. Leave the savings alone until we really are desperate to use them. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Well, I think many states right now would love to be in the position where they only spend 70% of their revenue. I'm sure the city of Detroit right now would adore to be in that position. 30% saving is a pretty steep rate. It's admirable, but it's a lot of money. And the problem in Wyoming, those of you who aren't from Wyoming or haven't spent a long time here probably know that the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund and many of the reserve accounts came about because back in the 60s, I think it was, under Stan Hathaway, the state of Wyoming found themselves with $65. And so we needed to do something about it. Unfortunately, the something we've done has apparently reduced our state to a desert where it never rains. As far as what would move me to spend it, I would have to see that and decide on a priority budget basis.
Your time is up. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Carol. I think before you even start talking about spending what's in the rainy day account, we have to talk about the rate of savings. $1.8 billion is a lot of money. And what are we saving for? The day, the rainy day that never seems to come. And the thing is in the meantime, we have services for the people, the hardworking people of Wyoming that are going unfunded. We have infrastructure that's not being funded. So we're basically setting ourselves up for failure. If we can choose to either prudently invest in our state today and save a reasonable portion for tomorrow, or we can sock it all under the mattress, because basically in this account, the rainy day account, we're earning less than 1% interest. Now, that paltry rate of return, I think, it pales in comparison to the return we could get if we invested in our people, if we invested in our infrastructure. Now, savings is great. I mean, I think we need to be prudent in our savings, don't get me wrong, but we need to look at smart ways to invest in our people and our state today.
And Mr. Gray.
I think the rainy day fund is necessary. The rainy day that we're waiting for is when our federal government becomes insolvent. Because right now we're bankrupt, we're just not broke. We're $17 trillion in debt, $150 trillion in unfunded obligations. We're borrowing up to 35 cents of every dollar the federal government spends. And they're largely able to finance that by getting a 2.9 interest rate when they sell their debt. But that's not going to last forever. The historical average is between 4 to 5%. Every percentage point that goes up is about $800 billion a year. So we're looking at about $1.6 trillion a year more just in interest costs when we hit the historical average of what the government has paid for borrowing money. And that's the rainy day we're saving for. And I think that's a necessary rainy day. And I think we need to figure out what we're going to do when all of the spending our federal government is racked up, when that all comes due, because it's going to be a very serious time for our country.
Time's up. Ms. Brown.
Well, I agree that we need to have a rainy day fund. We have to have for a contingency for who knows what's going to happen in the future. But we also need to have enough money to support the programs that we need now. And we need to be able to not have to raise the taxes on the people who are working in Wyoming right now. A lot of people cannot afford to have their property taxes raised again or the gas taxes go up again. A lot of people are barely making it from paycheck to paycheck. And I know how hard that is and how hard they work to just try to make ends meet. And they say a 10% a gallon tax didn't hurt them. Well, I'm here to say it did hurt a lot of people. It made a big difference in how much they have to spend on food and groceries and medicine and whatever else they need for their families. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Nelson. Do you favor providing health insurance to low-income adults through the expansion of Medicaid?
Absolutely, I do. I have yet to hear a reason grounded in fact why we don't accept the Medicaid waiver. I mean, let's put it this way. Let's put it in economic terms. The federal government wants to give us money, and we're saying no. Our hospitals need the money. Our state health department gave us some figures as to how much money this would bring into the state. It's a win-win at this point, and there's really no reason other than politics and ideology why we haven't accepted that Medicaid expansion. This is all but aside from the fact that it would provide health care coverage for approximately 17,000 low-income working people in Wyoming. And statistically, 111 people a year die because we fail to accept this Medicaid expansion. $68 million is approximately what we've turned away. And if the funding ever dries up from the federal government, we can opt out of it. So it's a no-lose situation.
Thank you. I'd ask the audience, please, to not participate. Mr. Gray.
I'm opposed to Medicaid expansion, and there are a few different prongs in my viewpoint on this, a few different reasons why I've come to this conclusion. One is that The federal government is not going to be able to provide this funding forever. It's a trick that they always use, which is they provide it at the start and then they pull back eventually, and then eventually we're going to be on the hook for this program that we can't afford. The other thing I want to say is this argument that has been put forward by a lot of big business that this money is going to be spent anyway. You know, I have a cowboy on my license plate that I drive around, and I don't think that's a valid argument to say, well, this money is going to be spent anyway, so we should be using it. If it's not responsible, we should be opting out of this, and it is not responsible. It legitimizes Obamacare, a law which, if you're not in the Medicaid, catastrophic insurance costs from $500 to $600 per month in the state of Wyoming because of the way they designed this law, which is not affordable. It's designed to get us to a single-payer system to force us into that, and that's wrong.
You're out of time.
That's wrong.
Ms. Brown.
I agree with Eric that we do need to accept the Medicare. I know of so many people who can't afford to get their medication, that they do without their medication so that their children can eat. And that's not right. And we can't afford health care. A lot of us don't have it. I don't have health care because we can't afford it. My husband just had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. We have $55,000 in medical bills now that we have no way to pay. So we should let people like us be able to use that Medicare, because there's a lot of us out there that can't afford the insurance and that don't have jobs that offer it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flesvig, Medicaid expansion.
Thank you. I received some information from the Wyoming Coalition for Medicaid Solutions. There's a few issues I do have with that. It spells it out pretty good, but there's the gap part where for low-income adults without dependent children, we're going to be handing them health insurance for existing. They're presumably, if they're able-bodied people, it's not the target I want to see. They did not mention anything about abortion. I'd like to see definitely that there's no coverage of taxpayers' money on abortion coverage, and most importantly, there's no deadline, there's no sunset provision. It's yet another program going in perpetuity. Thanks.
Ms. Linn.
This is a really complex issue. It's not an easy one. It's not easy for me to even give an answer because, on one hand, I'm very much a proponent of being compassionate to those who cannot take care of themselves or who don't have the means to have, adequate health care. So what I understand, though, about this issue is that there's nothing that is provided under Medicare expansion that's not already available to people through the Medicare system. And so to that extent, I ask, well, then why should we do it? I also tend to agree with my colleague Chuck Gray that it's a way for the federal government to offer to do something for us because we need it, and yet the question is that really what's best? I think we have a lot to look at in terms of healthcare and insurance. I think I'll be the first to admit that we have to find better solutions, one of which is people being more responsible for their own health and not taking it for granted and then expecting the government to take care of their health care.
Thank you. Mr. Walters.
Thank you. I voted against the Medicaid expansion a few times during this previous session earlier this year and would continue to do so. It's something that once offered we could never take back. We've had questions earlier in the evening that discussed the size of our government, that discussed rainy day accounts. And we talk about government spending and all of those sorts of things. And all this would do is add more folks to that spending. Currently, our Department of Health budget is the second largest budget right behind education. It's over $1.5 billion every biennium. We'd be spending a lot more than that if we opted into this program. Also, we've heard statements about what money would come in from the federal government. The state of Wyoming would have to spend several hundred million to receive about $50 million in return from the federal government. It's just not a cost-effective way to go. But I also think the question needs to be asked, if not Medicaid expansion, what are we going to do? We do need to take care of these folks. Currently, no one is getting left behind. We do have emergency rooms. It's just high cost to do it that way. So we need to come up with a better solution.
Mr. Opella.
Basically, I'm against the Medicaid expansion, but I think it's a point that everybody needs to understand about our community hospitals. We have about 23 of them. They're critical care hospitals in Wyoming, and those people are getting hurt for the money. And they have to take care of all the indigent people. The costs are going up every day, and more people are visiting our emergency rooms. So at some point, somebody's going to have to pay to keep those hospitals viable, or we're going to be in big trouble. We won't have any local sources for medical care. So please keep that in mind, but again, I'm against the waiver at this point. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
I am wholeheartedly for Medicaid expansion because it makes common fiscal sense. I'm back on familiar ground because I no longer agree with my comrades to the left here. And this is a great illustration of the misinformation that is flying all over the place. No, we don't pick up the tab in Wyoming. For the first 3 years, one of which we've already blown by following ideology, the federal government pays 100% of the Medicaid expansion. The people who are on Medicaid right now, it's a 50-50 split. This is a sweet deal, 100%. We have lost over $60 million thus far that we could have had. After that, the lowest it goes to is 90% federal dollars. When it comes to highways, water, air, schools, hospitals, our Department of Health, we take 40% federal dollars.
Okay, this one will start with Ms. Linn.
Make it an easy one, would you?
I didn't want any of them to be easy. State-run facilities that care for people with developmental, cognitive, or physical disabilities need approximately $151 million in maintenance and repairs at the 5 facilities. Do you believe providing these services at state-owned facilities is the state's job? Would you vote to provide the funds, or do you have a different solution?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do I agree with the maintenance that is
Do
needed?
you agree that the state should own facilities that care for people with developmental, cognitive, mental health? And if you don't want to put the money in the facilities, what would you do instead?
Okay, this is not hard. I believe that there are basically 2 major facilities in our state that would fall in this category. One would be the State Hospital in Evanston, and the other one is the Life Resources Center in Riverton. And those facilities serve people with significant developmental needs. Of course, we should provide those services to those people. It would be inhumane not to. They're very complex issues to provide. I mean, the services are complicated to provide. A lot of the people that are being cared for have acute, chronic problems, and they can't be self-sufficient. So yes, we do need to provide for those things. One question I would have is why have we waited until the maintenance needs have grown to $151 million before we're talking about how are we going to keep them maintained? And that seems to be something I continually hear as I'm participating in these forums across the state, from roads to everything else. So that's interesting.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. I do believe this is something that government does provide. We are a civilized society, and as such, we take care of our folks that cannot take care of themselves. At the age of 18, someone becomes an adult, and at that point, their family is no longer liable to pay those expenses. And if you are unable to care for yourself, somebody must do that. And as I said, as a civilized society, we all pitch in a little bit to help out those who can't take care of themselves. In terms of the facilities around the state, it's a little premature, I think, right now to make a decision on that. We have a couple committees within the legislature that are currently looking into the best options. There are families out there that would like to see those folks moved back into their communities and have services offered through their communities. There are others that feel that that should maybe just be left in Lander or in Evanston and have those places as one-stop shop kind of places. We need to look at it from a cost perspective. We need to look at it from a personal perspective and how it affects those individuals. And once those issues have been addressed, then we can start to make some real serious decisions.
Mr. Opella.
I have a little different take on this. Yes, I think we ought to provide the services to those people who need it. But I would like to see a little bit more the private sector getting involved in this stuff. I'm on the board of the Central Wyoming Counseling Center, so I'll put in a plug for them. It takes about, I think it's about $1,000 a day for somebody down in Evanston to support a person down there. There's a lot of different places that can do this for a lot less money and go back to their local community. And I think that's one of the best ways we have for care. The families are there, and I would just like to see, maybe this is something the government can't provide very effectively. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Yes. I served on the State Board of the ARC for several years and got an inside perspective on this by dealing with self-advocates and families of developmentally disabled persons. The facility in Lander serves a very real need, but we have to be careful that we don't wind up warehousing people for convenience. There are currently many regional service providers that try to community-base as many individuals as is possible. It is not always possible to keep those persons in the community, and that's where the state-run facility comes in. I think we need to spend the money to ensure that we provide safe and effective services for those people who cannot be community-based.
Time's up. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. So I guess my answer to this is really two-pronged. I think to the extent that we continue to have these state-run facilities, we need to step up to the plate and fund the maintenance and make sure that they're safe and adequate facilities. Now, this is an area I'm not quite as intimately familiar with, but I have heard of some community-based initiatives trying to get these individuals back into their communities, back into more of a home environment, and I think we need to explore those opportunities. And if we can get them back in their communities, that may ultimately be the best thing. But at the end of the day, the state needs to step up and provide the funding to do this, whether it's a private provider or the state provider. You know, we've shown a reticence to provide for Medicaid expansion, insurance expansion. Well, who's going to pay for this? And so we as a state need to step up not only in the maintenance aspect to make sure that these, if we go to a community-based program, that there's funding available for these families to take care of their loved ones.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
This issue is an example of something that is a function of state government to handle this issue, because as we mentioned, we are a civilized society, and it puts into context why we need to prioritize our budget and decide what we should be doing. And this is an example of something that is very important for us to be involved in. Now, looking to the specific issue that you talked about, I have not heard the testimony down in Cheyenne and the different committees that are involved in this. So regarding the specific facilities you discussed, I'm not sure specifically the approach to take on that, because I know there are many different approaches. Mr. Opella's approach, discussion about private facilities. I had a discussion with somebody going door to door who his family has taken care of somebody who struggles with mentally, and they receive a certain sum every month to help with that. And he said, according to the statistics, it's much cheaper for that to be done in that way. Not only that, it's the more humane thing for them to be in a community with other people.
Time's up. Ms. Brown.
Well, I have a niece that works in this area. She's been taking care of these type of people in her home for a long time. And I see the benefits of having them put in homes where they get to have the interaction and have family life as compared to being in the facility. But there are some people that they cannot be put in an individual's home because a person cannot just take care of them. They need more attention than one person can provide. So we still need the state-run facilities for them. So I see we need to figure out how to do maybe both, keep the state-run facilities open for those that need it, but also bring back the people into their communities where it's better for them.
Thank you. Mr. Flesvig.
The answer to the question is building repairs, whether or not the state should do it or not. Private sector would be great to keep up with the building repairs. I don't know why they chose to pick, pull at the heartstrings of the challenged in order to extract more state money. So I'm for them just not apportion the money it's, terrible that they can't fix the buildings. Private sector would offer a solution, and I just don't believe that they put everything they could in order to get those buildings up to safe and good repair.
Thank you. We'll start this one with Ms. Longtine. Would Wyoming taxpayers and fans be better served if UW were in a different athletic conference than Division I? Well, we needed to lighten it up a little bit. And please use your microphone. The audience wants to hear us well.
I'm sorry. I thought I was so loud that everybody could hear me anyway. Well, congratulations, Carol. You have managed to ask me a question on which I know absolutely nothing, because I must confess to probably my great detriment that I don't follow UW football or athletics much. Yes. I am an NC graduate, and I have a degree from the University of Wyoming, but I'm just not a big football fan. So the whole division thing, I don't know. I know we do spend a great deal of money on sports for the University of Wyoming. And sometimes I am concerned that we don't spend quite as much on academics as we should at the expense of academics, because we're spending it on sports. We have some gorgeous facilities down there, but sometimes our academics suffer.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
I could probably do better if you asked me how their season's going to go than I could on this. But in all seriousness, I think that in answering that, you really have to look at it as a Division I athletic conference school, and as a member of the Mountain West Conference, there's revenue that's generated by being at that top tier. And if you drop down to a lower tier, then that revenue is going to drop. And along with that, you've got the ancillary economic benefits. Now, I'm not saying at this point that I know one way or the other, but I think those are the things that you have to look at in terms of, from an economic standpoint, if changing that division designation would be beneficial to the state and to the university. I tend to agree. I mean, I think for me, education comes first, athletics second, but the University of Wyoming is so ingrained in the state. I think it would be a hard thing to get that moved on.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
I'm not passionate about this issue. I follow sports. I follow UW football. My inclination is that we should always want to reach our fullest potential. And I think the more difficult situation we're in, the better, because that allows us to reach our fullest potential. It motivates us. It helps us to reveal our weaknesses and our strengths as individuals and as a team. So my first inclination, while not having studied the issue, is that I think it's very important. I think it's good for us to stay in Division I, and that those kind of things about reaching our fullest potential are kind of the reasons why I'm running. I think we can do better, and I think just to say that we can't, this notion that we need to go to a lower division, I don't accept that notion. So,
Ms. Brown.
Well, I think football and sports is very important to the colleges because it brings in a lot of revenue for the colleges. And when the football team gets to be on television, they get money. This university gets money from being on television. So when we're in Division I, we get to be on television more, so we will get more money. So I think we need to stay in that division. And I think sports is a good thing for the colleges because it brings them recognition, it brings students to us, and it brings us revenue.
Thank you. Mr. Flesvig.
I would like to pretty much let that issue be set for the board or the trustees down there in Laramie. The Constitution is silent on football. Thanks.
Miss Linn.
This is a good opportunity for me to tell Mr. Nelson down there that my dad would be pleased if I invited you to come home to have dinner at his house. Just wanted you to know that some of the answers you've given would really please my dad. And unfortunately, ideologically, we differ quite a bit at this end of the table. But in this subject, again, I'm not nearly as passionate about it as a lot of people in Wyoming. But I agree. I have to agree with my Democrat colleagues that I think academics are far more important than athletics. Having said that, I'll tell you a fun fact about myself. My husband and I met because we were both competitive racquetball players, and we met at a tournament in which we both won first place here in Casper. My husband, though, is a big sandbagger. He just believes that, it's okay to drop down so you can get first place. I hope you can laugh at this and not get mad. And I am just the opposite. I would rather be in the top tier even if I lose, because that just makes me feel good about myself.
Your time is
so
up.
That's my answer.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. Athletics are the billboard for all institutions. And so for academic funding purposes, having a strong athletic team, having a strong athletic team that is out on the forefront, being visible on TV, on radio, and all of that sort of stuff, brings money into the institution from the academic side. And so I think remaining in Division I is absolutely imperative at this point. It may not always be the decision of the University of Wyoming as divisions change in the coming years. Wyoming may not be invited to continue to be a Division I school, and there may even be more divisions created, and who knows what's going to happen in NCAA athletics. But that's a question that the University of Wyoming Board of Trustees and the University of Wyoming administration needs to deal with. This is not a legislative issue. The legislature funds the University of Wyoming, but the legislature tries not to micromanage how the university runs.
And Mr. Opella.
Well, I'm glad I won't be the one deciding that, because I'm afraid the ropes would come out and they'd be looking for some bodies if they even try to do something like that. As long as we're competitive, I think we ought to stay in the Division I. So, thank you.
Thank you. Getting more serious, we'll start with Mr. Opella. Even with the 10-cent gas tax increase, the Wyoming Department of Transportation is still facing a shortage of funds to build and maintain Wyoming's roads. How would you find more money for the state's highways?
Well, as I look at it, there's only one way it's going to have to come out of the general fund. It's going to have to come from someone else. And if the roads are indeed the lifeblood of Wyoming, which they are, for the oil, minerals, coal, the tourist industry, we're going to have to come up with that money. I think since the gas tax went in, they've funded 53 projects, I believe it is, right now. And keep in mind, we're only maintaining the roads. We're not making them better. We're just maintaining them. We can't keep up. So somewhere it's going to have to be a subject for the legislature to decide what kind of roads they want. But roads mean money to the businesses, so somebody's going to have to pay the price. So thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Yes, this is a tough one because Wyoming has more miles per capita of roads than any other state. Roads are very, very important to our businesses, our health care, our education, staying in contact with our families. I drive back and forth to Laramie to visit my daughter. So it's a very central issue in the state. But we don't pay for what we're using. And we keep looking for solutions to have other people pay for what we use. That's a very popular way to do things in the state of Wyoming. Most of us don't pay. We have no income tax like so many other states. We get about $1.30 back from the federal government for every dollar. So we would have to look for other sources of funding other than just gas tax.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. I think that the 10 cent per gallon tax increase was a good start. It brought us on par with surrounding states, and because of the regional markets for gasoline, we only saw it at 2 to 3 or maybe 4 cent increase at the pump. So, in terms of having it be a broad, fair, and equitable tax to fund what is a vitally important asset to the state, our roads and bridges, that was a good start. And we're looking at still there being a shortfall, and I think this is an area that we need to discuss rather than putting additional general fund money into a low interest-bearing account. Is it better spent doing one-time road projects? Our oil and gas industry is dependent upon good roads. Our extractive industries are dependent upon good roads. Tourism, our second largest industry, is dependent upon it. In essence, all of our industries depend on these roads. We need to invest in that infrastructure. It'll provide jobs, it'll provide benefits and for this state going on long into the future.
Mr. Gray.
Roads are absolutely pivotal, and we need to fund them, but we need to fund them properly, and we should do it by right-sizing our government here in Wyoming. Tax increases are wrong. Gas tax increase was wrong. We need to move to priority-based budgeting, where agencies describe to the legislature what they believe is the most important thing they do and list down. And then the legislature can make decisions responsibly rather than across-the-board cuts. They can do it responsibly through priority-based budgeting and find the money to make this work. I believe it's there. We have plenty of revenues in this state. We have the highest per capita spending in the nation. Now, granted, that's a little thrown off by our low population, but it's still the highest. It should not be that high. We, as conservatives, we should be lower than number one on that statistic. That's not a good number one to be.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Well, I'm not sure where we should get all the money from. I know we need to come up with some new resources for getting the money for our roads. But this would be one thing that I would consider dipping into the rainy day fund for, because our roads are so important to us in all aspects of our lives. And I think that would be one of the things that the rainy day fund could invest in.
Mr. Flesvig.
Roads are integral to our state. We need them. They're post roads. It's outlined in the Constitution. I'm not altogether certain raising tax would do any much good. We already raised another 10 cents on top of what we're already paying. I propose we kind of look into spending. There would be a small chance there could be some waste in there if we dig deep enough. So I think I'd start with that. Thanks.
Ms. Linn.
I agree with Mr. Gray on this issue. I think that with a $9 billion budget in the state of Wyoming, there should be a way that we can do priority-based budgeting and adequately take care of the needs of our infrastructure in terms of our roads. If we can't, then I'm curious to find out why, and then I would have a different answer. But that's the way it looks to me at this point from where I sit, and I realize I'm fairly new to this party. When I've been in office for 2 years, I hope I can sound like Mr. Walters, because I've been really impressed with his command of facts, figures, and detail. And I know that he's learned a tremendous amount in the last couple of years and did not have all of this knowledge when he entered the legislature.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. As stated already, the roads are integral to the state of Wyoming. There's a couple things that are working against highway funding. First of all, inflation has outpaced the taxation, whether on a federal basis or on a state basis. Secondly, people are driving fewer miles. And third, they're driving more fuel-efficient cars. So decades ago, had we done this right, and it's easy to look back and say what could have been done better, we would have started, rather than a cents per gallon, we would have started as a percentage per gallon. And by doing that percentage in taxation per gallon, it would have allowed us to keep up with inflation, it would have allowed us to keep up with more economical cars, and it would have allowed us to keep up the maintenance we have. But we're not there. So instead, we are where we are today, and we do need to continue to maintain them. General fund dollars is going to be the best way to go about it. In the late 90s, the state of Wyoming went away from earmarks. Before that, we had earmarks for various accounts and various activities. When the state decided to do that, we said we're going to look at everything every year and decide how we want to prioritize and do it, and so that's where we are today.
Next question, we'll start with you again, Mr. Walters. You were on a roll there. Do you support the Common Core education standards Wyoming adopted in 2012? If not, what would you support adopting instead?
In 2012, the Common Core education standards are just for math and English. The state of Wyoming has 9 or 10 core education areas. Those are only 2 that were reviewed and adopted that year. They do increase vigor and do increase demand over what the state of Wyoming had previously in those 2 subject areas. There's folks that don't like the way they were developed. I'm not sure that I know good or bad in that regard. I have read through them, and in reading them, the mathematics 2 plus 2 is still equaling 4. 2 times 2 is still equaling the same as it did prior to Common Core. In English, it's the same way. It is still locally driven. All we're talking about is a standard, and that standard in Common Core is the baseline. Every district and every local municipality or local district can increase that and change that however they would like. We are still a locally controlled education system, and so until somebody has a better idea on what those standards should be, I think we should stick with them and quit changing the bar.
Mr. Opella.
Well, it seems like every 3 or 4 years we go to some new standards, some new testing. Common Core, from everybody I have talked to, they really do not like it. They don't know, they don't understand it. And anything you don't understand, you're not going to like. If we can need some more standards, I think we ought to have Wyoming standards and Wyoming testing. I'm not for anything that comes out of back east. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
I am wholeheartedly for Common Core standards. We have standards when we raise our children. We have standards for the electricity delivered to our houses. We have standards for the quality of the water we drink. And somehow standards for education is out of line. The sad fact is that Wyoming standards are not up to the Common Core standards at this point in time. And the idea that we need to spend a lot of time and money developing Wyoming standards for Wyoming people somehow ignores the fact that our children leave and have to find jobs in other places. Saying that everyone should be able to think and perform up to a certain minimum basis is not unreasonable. It's just good common sense. Common Core was developed by the governors of the United States so that we could make our young people competitive nationally and internationally.
You're out of time. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. In terms of supporting the Common Core, I can't add too much to what Ms. Longtine and Mr. Walter said. I do support it, but I think it's good to note we're running for the state legislature here, folks, and we as legislators should not be micromanaging educational policy. These are educational decisions that should be made by professional educators who are trained and have the experience to make these determinations. And I suppose that the lack of leadership that's come out of Cheyenne and the education department the last couple of years may have contributed to this void. But if I'm elected, I'm not going to micromanage. I'm not going to dictate standards in a footnote attached to a budget bill that, you know, other legislators may or may not have read before they voted on it. That's not the way Wyoming passes laws, and we shouldn't be delving into that. So certainly I support standards, support Common Core, but I support the proper people making the decisions.
Mr. Gray.
I'm very opposed to the Common Core standards for a few reasons. One is that the idea that a student in Philadelphia has the same needs at any particular time during their education than one in Casper, Wyoming is wrong. Localism, which is what our country was founded on, said that education was going to be a local issue. And I believe strongly it is. It worked until the early 2000s when we got involved in No Child Left Behind. We saw how that worked. That was not getting involved in standards. They decided to wait until Mr. Obama entered office, and then they decided to get into standards. And many states, Wyoming included, decided to sign on to that, which I think was a huge error. The other thing I want to say about standards is, I was reading Frederick Bastiat the other day, the famous economist, and this great word he used for centralized power, spoliate. I saw that word spoliate. It's spoils. All centralized power spoils over time. These standards are going to expand over time. They're going to try to get involved in homeschooling. They just haven't done it at the start.
You're out of time.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Well, I'm totally against Common Core. That's one of the reasons I decided to run, because I don't like the way it is making our schools work. The teachers don't understand it. If the teachers don't understand it, how are the students supposed to understand it? And how are the parents supposed to understand it? If the child comes home and has a problem with their homework and the parent has no idea how to help them, what are we going to do? The children will not get their homework done, they will not learn, and they will not grow. And I don't think someone back in Washington, D.C. should be telling us how to raise and educate our children.
Mr. Flesvig.
I oppose Common Core. I can't sit here and run against Steve Harshman and say I am in support of Common Core. He has an extensive voting record in support of Common Core. I oppose it. We as parents can educate our children We can interact with the teachers, the principals, school board. We can do it at a local level. We can do it at Cheyenne, but not in DC. It's wrong. You're dumbing down our children. It's a patent attack on the family core values. Thank you.
Ms. Linn.
Well, this is near and dear to my heart issue, and I would correct some of the things that have been spoken out. I have a degree in education, and I've looked into this subject. In the first state that adopted Common Core was New York. They were brought on board about 2 years before everyone else. Their teachers' union has unanimously voted to repeal Common Core and get it out of their school system. They had scores in the high 70s when they first instituted Common Core. After Common Core, they went down to the low 30s. They've also called for the resigning of their superintendent of their system. The the governor of Maine is worried about winning his bid for re-election because the people in Maine are so upset about Common Core and what it's done to their education system. You need to go to my website and see an excellent video where a professor, an English professor from the University of Wisconsin tells all the facts about Common Core. While Tom says 2 + 2 still equals 4, it now takes 10 minutes for the child to reach that conclusion.
Let's start with Ms. Brown. And we'll go this way for Ms. Brown. As a legislator, how would you hold school districts, schools, and school administrators accountable?
That's a tough one, because each child is different, each teacher is different, each school is different. I think we need to be able to see how the children are progressing in each school to see if the teachers and the school district are doing what they need to be doing. I'm not exactly sure how we can do this. That'd have to be something I'd have to look into.
Mr. Flesvig?
As a legislator, I would encourage parents to hold their feet to the fire at school boards and make that, redirect it that way. That's their representation for the school board, and that's how that could be resolved. Thanks.
Ms. Linn?
I think that we're in the middle of a revolution with regard to this in the state of Wyoming. People have become activated on the issue of education because of what happened in our legislature. 2 years ago, I had a representative, Mr. Tom Lockhart, tell me that the legislature had nothing to do with Common Core. And that's not true. It's widely published that Wyoming is on board with Common Core. I don't appreciate being spoken to that way when I contact my legislators. I wrote letters to all of the legislators when SF 104 was before them. I got answers out of 90 people from 7. Thankfully, I want to give Mr. Walters a plug. He was one of those who politely answered me. Some of the answers were not polite. There's no excuse for that. People are going to be holding people accountable in education in this state from now on because we have been awoken.
Mr. Walters?
Thank you. Currently, the state of Wyoming is taking on a great accountability project in education. It started about 3 years ago. It's being developed by professionals in the field, and it will take into account everything from teacher activity, parental activity. Is it the principals? Who is at fault? Where are the kids falling through the cracks? And all of those things are being asked, and all of those things are going to be figured out here in the next couple of years. And I think that is great. And that came about because of all of you sitting in this room and everyone else around the state of Wyoming. Wyoming currently spends the most per capita on our students. And everyone around the state of Wyoming decided to find out why are we spending the most and hitting about the middle of the road in terms of our results. And so that's ongoing. Things don't happen overnight. We have to look at trends. We have to look at it from an overall perspective. How it's going in Casper is different than how it's going in Lovell, how it's going in Evanston, how it's going in Sheridan or Gillette. So we need to look at it overall from a statewide perspective because it is funded from a statewide perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Opella?
That's an interesting question, since the judgment that was given by the Supreme Court many years ago, how the schools are supposed to be funded. I don't know as a legislator if I have the expertise to get involved in educational matters. To me, it's always been left to the local school board. And I think it should still be left there, and if the people in there, that particular district, don't like the way the school board's operating and getting the results they want, then it should be up to them to vote them out of office, just like they would vote us out of office if we were down there making wrong decisions. So that's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Longtine.
I have to agree with Mr. Opella. Education is a local issue. It's been said, stated, and come up several times today in this venue that it is a local issue. And it is up to your local school boards, your local parents, to hold your teachers, schools, and school boards accountable. The legislature has certain oversight abilities, but we do not dictate curriculum or results. We can fund studies, but the actual control rests with the voters in each district.
Mr. Nelson.
Well, it kind of stinks going towards the end because then you say a lot of the same things, because I tend to, once again, to agree. I think that it is a local issue by and large. I think that the legislature's role in education to a large degree is providing funding for facilities construction. But the issues of holding teachers accountable, to holding the school boards accountable, those are local issues. When it comes to gauging performance, I think that a number of issues have to be taken into account, because as an educator, there are certain factors that are outside of your control. So how those accountability measures are handled, I think, are best left to the professionals in the education department. I think as legislators, if we want to see our children do better, we need to support programs that are going to ensure that children go to bed fed, that they go to school fed, that they have places to live, that their families have adequate health care and access to health care, and I think then you'll see education numbers drastically improve.
Mr. Gray.
Yes, I believe that education performance testing is a local issue for the local school boards. It's kind of like the question on the UW conference that was just stated earlier, which I know was in, just to lighten the mood up a little bit, but it's very important. And this is one area where I think our country, we've lost it a little bit, where we ask questions sometimes in certain settings in legislative districts that aren't the duties of those legislators. I see it all the time in Senate races where they ask about things that the Senate has no control over. And it murkies our decision-making process. It makes it worse. So it's very important for us to understand that this is a local issue now. The Common Core is a state issue. Standard setting, one of the legacies in No Child Left Behind is that the Common Core is a state-level issue, and I believe we should vote to get out of it.
Let's start with Mr. Nelson. Should the legislature look at legalizing medical marijuana?
I think that's an interesting question. Let me just tell you, I've walked and talked to a lot of people, and I met a man who suffers from rheumatoid arthritis and has since he was an early teen. And he indicated that he had a number of other problems because of all the rheumatoid drugs that he had taken over the years, to just eating him up inside. And he said, God, I hear about some of the benefits that this medicine might have, but I'm not going to try it because if it's not legal, I wouldn't last a day in jail. And so, it was really kind of poignant for me. I mean, I had to go into his house. He couldn't get up to talk to me. And so I think there's some merit in exploring legalization for medicinal purposes. I think we've got a great incubator down in Colorado to see how their legalization works out, and then make a decision that's best for Wyoming. So at this point, I'm not ready to commit one way or the other, but I think it's worth looking at and discussing.
Mr. Gray.
I'm opposed to. I want to look into the issue, but my initial inclination is that I'm opposed to this.
Ms. Brown.
I don't see the problem in legalizing the marijuana for medical use. It's a drug that would have to be given to the patient by the doctor. They would have to have a prescription for it. It's just like any other drug. I have a back injury. I'm on medication for it. I get pain medications, which has lots of side effects. I won't take my pain medication unless I am so bad off that I can't even move, because of all the other side effects that it has. And for what I have read and heard, marijuana has a lot less side effects than some of the drugs that I have been prescribed by my doctors. So I don't see the harm in letting the doctors and patients decide if they want to use that or not.
Mr. Flesvig.
I'm also, I'm on the fence, some jury's out on this. We see our laboratories of democracy down in Colorado. We're seeing how that's going to unfold. I support the state's right to make that kind of law. I support the state's right to nullify Obamacare. I support taking action in Cheyenne to do something like that. If I'm well representing people in my district, if that's what they want, I'll have to put their values first. Thank you.
Ms. Linn.
I work with pharmaceutical and biotech companies as a headhunter. I'm an executive recruiter, a search consultant, and I recruit biostatisticians who are engaged in the statistical analysis of drugs that are being tested for use in humans. And they start out by testing them in animals and making sure that they don't harm the animals and that they're working, they're doing what they expect them to do, that they're affecting metabolism in the ways that they think they should. They have pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and they go through all of these things to make sure those drugs are safe in humans and that they actually treat what the drug company is saying that they will treat. If we want to put marijuana into humans to treat diseases, it should be treated like any other disease that is regulated by the FDA, in my opinion.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. I'm opposed to medical marijuana. In my opinion, that we would just have a few unscrupulous doctors end up being very wealthy individuals, because I think every malady under the sun would all of a sudden be cured by marijuana. If you could write a prescription, never really see the patient, and get paid a sizable sum for that prescription you just wrote. The state of Wyoming, and the United States for that matter, already has enough mind-altering drugs out there, and we spend thousands and millions of dollars a year trying to cure the adverse effects of those. And so I don't think we need to add one more to that list.
Mr. Opella.
Again, I'll refer to my position on the board, Central Wyoming Counseling Center. We have lots of people up there in our residential facility that start out doing different things with different drugs. And I think medical marijuana is just the start of one of many others. So I say no. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Medical marijuana hasn't been high up on my priority list, but I definitely think it's worth looking at and considering. I know that the science shows that it is definitely efficacious, is helpful for some people with various conditions. It has a long, long history of helping as an antiemetic with cancer patients and also helping with glaucoma patients. So I think it's worth considering. I'd like to see a strong push for it in the state of Wyoming, which we may or may not see, because it could be that all of our marijuana users are all driving to Colorado for the weekend.
And Mr. Oh, that was last. You get a new question. We'll start with you, Mr. Walters. What's a reasonable solution to the shortage of game and fish funding?
The shortage of game and fish funding, we started attacking that in this previous session. And as we moved some of the health insurance for those employees over to the state instead of coming straight from the funds that are paid by the sportsmen. What we have to remember on the game and fish funding is a lot of their dollars are spent managing things that are not necessarily game species. And historically, the game species, the deer, the antelope, the fishing, all of that funded that department. But now that department is expected to take care of wolves, grizzly bears, sage grouse, and all of that sort of stuff. And we can say, hey, we aren't going to do that as a state. We'll let the feds do it. But if we do that, then we're in the back seat and we're letting the feds control what we're doing in the state of Wyoming. So if we want to have a front seat place at this discussion, we've got to continue to fund that. And because of that, we're going to have to spend more of general fund dollars helping the game and fish out, because we want to be in control of what happens with Wyoming's wildlife.
Mr. Opella.
Well, I agree with Mr. Walters here. That's a very simple solution, is to try to get the money out of the general fund, out of the tourism budget, because you can't continue to get all their budget from just licenses. It's just going to be too heavy a toll. And we got such a great tourism a part of tourism is the hunting and fishing. Brings a lot of people here, a lot of money. So somebody's got to pay to have them, just like highways. I suggest general fund. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Yeah, it's interesting that this question came up because I was thinking about this the other day after going on a wonderful, wonderful presentation by the Game and Fish on the remediation work they're doing in cooperation with some other agencies on Bolton Creek. And it's absolutely amazing what they're doing out there. As a matter of fact, Representative Walters was on that tour with me. The fact is that the hunters and the fishers cannot carry the freight. They cannot carry the water for all of us. A lot of us enjoy the benefits that the Game and Fish provides here. And we have, in many ways, world-class hunting and fishing in this state, which drives tourism, drives lots of dollars to our state. But there are lots of people, myself included, who don't necessarily shoot anything or catch anything, and maybe we need to start paying some of the freight.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. You know, I very much agree with the sentiments that have just been stated. We need to ensure that our Game and Fish Department is adequately funded. And the last go around, it was really the legislature put them kind of in a box. They said, well, we don't want to give you any general funds, but at the same time, we're not going to allow you to raise Game and Fish license fees. And so they came up with some novel ways to raise some funding. The superfecta, trifecta raised about $500,000, and that's great. That's obviously not going to plug the gap there. So I do think we need to look at taking some of the general funding and helping out the Game and Fish Department. Our oil and gas industries, our extractive industries are so dependent upon proper management of sage grouse and other endangered species that the state would lose tons if those got listed. And you know, if you look at what had to be cut the last go around, it was the Game and Fish Expo and the things that we as citizens enjoy day to day. Let's not let that happen.
Mr. Gray.
I view this issue as a very important case study in my race. My opponent voted for, I believe it was SF 95, a bill number may be wrong, which began the process of moving Game and Fish to the general fund. And I view this as a very important case study. It's not just the specific issue, but it's a case study. Because we were talking earlier about how we don't have enough money in the general fund for highways. And this is the reason. All these agencies that used to be right-sized, that could finance themselves, that are gradually being moved to the general fund. This sort of irresponsibility is what we need to move away from in government. It's not statesmanlike, and it's what is wrong down there in Cheyenne. We need to make this agency right-sized. For example, Game and Fish is involved in bird farms. There was a study done where a bird that's raised on a Game and Fish farm costs $28 per bird. This was on Wyoming Liberty Group. They did a study on it. A similar bird farm in another state that's private run costs $294 per bird. This is an example of strategies we need to use to right-size Game and Fish and get it working again, so it doesn't need access to general fund.
Ms. Brown.
I haven't given this a whole lot of thought because I'm not a hunter, but I have family members who are, so I see the importance of it. And I think maybe bringing money in from the general fund and maybe having some other people come up with some other ideas on how to do this, people that have more knowledge of this area than I do, because this isn't my forte.
Mr. Flesvig.
Game and Fish is kind of snowballed and worked outside of its scope of its original intent. Originally, it's supposed to be funded with largely with user fees, or hunting license, fishing license, etc. But they've been shouldered with more burden, work outside of their original intent and their scope. So something we need to look at is get them back in direction, doing game, doing fish, and explore other avenues for everything else they do. But and then I'm a hunter and I do like tasty animals. Thank you.
Ms. Linn.
I think, I just think that what Chuck Gray says makes a lot of sense. I know that he is a student of fiscal conservatism. He spends his weekends watching C-SPAN, for goodness sakes. And when he talks about right-sizing government agencies and doing prioritizing the budget process, it's interesting because recently I watched a presentation on YouTube from the Mises Institute, and the gentleman, this scholar said exactly what Chuck is saying. He said, in government, people always will cut the exact opposite thing they should cut first, because they want to hold everybody over a barrel so that they'll continue funding what they want. But in private business, people will, cut the things that they should first, because that's private enterprise and their priorities are different. That's why we're running for office. Those of us who are true conservatives, and one of them anyway is not here tonight, a couple aren't here, that's why we're running here, because we are true conservatives and we want to do what's best for Wyoming.
Your time is up. Let's start with you, Mr. Flesvig. Wyoming was the first state to require oil and gas companies to disclose some of the chemicals used in fracking. Do you think there should be more full disclosure of chemicals that oil and gas companies are using?
Yes, I think that is a legitimate function we could do in Cheyenne. As long as we keep the federal regulators out of it, we can do that right here in Cheyenne. We see what kind of overreach the EPA does, and shutting down coal power plants across the nation. But yeah, definitely, we want to have fresh water. We want to know what's in it, and that's something we can do in Cheyenne.
Ms. Linn.
Would you mind reading the question again?
Wyoming was the first state to require oil and gas companies to disclose some of the chemicals used in fracking. Do you think there should be more full disclosure of chemicals?
Well, I think that you need to consider the source of that kind of thing. So if it was our state legislature or a regulatory body that is elected locally that was in charge of asking for that disclosure, then I think that's a good thing. If it had been some environmental activism group, Greenpeace group, somebody that's just trying to shut down the oil and gas industry, then I would be skeptical of it. Generally, for the public good, yes, we should have full disclosure, but I think you have to look at, you have to consider the source in these kinds of things. And I forgot to give you my website that I asked you to go to earlier. It's karalinn.com, KARALINN.com.
Mr. Walters.
I do not believe they should be expected to release any more proprietary information than has already been expected of them. Fracking began in the 50s and 60s. It just became more popular in the front page of the media in the last few years as horizontal drilling became more economical and multi-stage fracking started to take place. We're talking about an activity that happens 10,000 feet below the surface with many, many layers of sedimentary rock and everything else, purifying water before it ever gets to the surface. So I don't believe that fracking has any impact on the quality of water at the surface. I think that the oil and gas companies do an excellent job of maintaining healthy and safe wellbores. And so I don't think that proprietary information needs to be released any more than it already has been.
Mr. Opella.
I think the oil companies have given quite a bit of information out, and I don't think they need to go as far as, like say, with their proprietary stuff. It's a very competitive business, and it's not necessary at this point. The fracking has proven itself all over the country. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Well, fracking has proven itself to be a very controversial issue all over the country, and because of lack of baseline data in many places, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Pavilion, no concrete decisions can be reached because there wasn't any essential core data. What this question seems to be asking is, should the state have some data? And yes, they should. Should we just publish it for everybody? Well, if it's proprietary, no. But there are lots of private and proprietary pieces of information that our local, state, and federal governments ask us for that everybody doesn't have access to. And knowing what's going into our water tables and our aquifers is probably a good idea.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Wyoming was on the forefront of some of the disclosure rules on fracking, and as many of you may know, this was challenged up to the Wyoming Supreme Court and then kicked back down. Basically, the issue is whether the Oil and Gas Commission here in Casper made a proper administrative decision to keep that information, deem it proprietary. So I think there is a mechanism in place to provide that information. I don't think that at this point it needs to be tweaked any further. I think that working hand in glove with that are some of the regulations that have been passed to require companies to do baseline water testing, to drill offset wells. So when we have a case like Pavilion, we can track what was the groundwater like prior to the drilling, what was it after the drilling, and really, you know, and I think fracking, it has been around for a long time and contributes a lot to the state. We just have to make sure it's done right. And so I think that there are some good regulations in place, and we as a state need to stay at the forefront of this issue.
Mr. Gray.
I do want to listen to all the testimony on this issue if I am lucky enough to go down to Cheyenne. My initial inclination, though, and I believe I'm pretty strong on this, is that the regulation is right-sized on this, and we do not need new regulations on this issue.
Ms. Brown.
I believe there's plenty of regulations on the oil and gas industry as there is now, and we don't need to be putting any more problems on these people who are trying to support our economy here. Our whole state runs on the oil and gas industry. I do agree that we need to have fresh water and we need to make sure that there aren't dangerous chemicals going into our waters, but I'm sure that the oil companies are already taking care of this.
Mr. Flesvig. Oh, she was last for that question. I'm sorry. I was trying to decide what I was going to ask next. I'm so excited. Do you favor Wyoming taking over management of federal lands in the state? Let's start with Ms. Linn.
Do I favor Wyoming taking over management?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a topic that I have an interest in, and I've been to a couple of presentations by the American Lands Council. I think it's very important. I think, you know, I haven't made any absolute decisions about it. I know that there have been some interesting things that have happened with regard to some other states and their federal lands. Some states have been able to get more of their federal land back in the control of their states. There's a tremendous amount of mineral wealth that lies within our federal lands. In my mind, there's no reason why the federal government should necessarily feel that they own that. When they brought us into the Union, they did so under the enablement clause. Many of us, we came in a little bit different way, but the end result was the same. We were really supposed to have the opportunity to control those lands again ourselves. And I think there's some potential complications with that we would need to be very responsible in looking at. Some people have pointed out to me that they really like the federal lands being managed by the federal government and the access that they get.
Out of time.
It's complicated.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting subject that needs to be looked at a lot more. I think there are a lot of pros that could come with it. You know, managing everything within our borders is definitely a good thing. It comes back to managing things locally. However, I do think there are some concerns that could come about from it. You know, from an agricultural perspective, there are a lot of folks in the state of Wyoming that lease land from the federal government at a very inexpensive rate. And if the state were to become the manager of that, the state leases are already double what the federal leases are. And would that put our agricultural producers in a losing situation? We need to answer those questions. Would this be just surface, or would it be surface and mineral taking over and management? We need to answer those sorts of questions. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before we just carte blanche say that we're going to take over management of the federal lands.
Mr. Opella.
I too see some problems with it. Yes, it's nice in theory, but what you're going to end up is you're going to have the Wyoming BLM that's going to work for the state government, because you're going to have to manage those lands. You're going to have to watch them, you're going to have to fence them, you're going to have to take care of all the problems with them. So all you're going to do is create another bureaucracy. So be careful what you ask for, because it could turn into a nightmare, but it has to be explored. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine.
Well, this question has seemed to be very popular in this election cycle, but there are indeed a lot of problems with it. The first biggest problem is that we enjoy a really nice lifestyle here. I can go out and ride my mountain bike and canoe and fish and hike and camp in a lot of places all over this state because of all our federal lands. Because state lands, among other things, you can't camp overnight on them unless they happen to be a park. So are we really willing to give that up? If any of you have ever lived in another state, like gone back east where all the land is private, your opportunities for hunting and fishing and recreation are highly limited. And then, of course, you don't want to grow government, but you want to take over the management of all these lands? Guess what? That's a recipe for growing government.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. I think there are a lot of problems with this, but I think the number one problem is the lack of a legal basis. These sagebrush rebellion type, views have kind of come and gone since at least the 80s. And I guess my response is, well, show me a federal, court opinion that says that there is some legal basis for the state to mandate the federal government to turn these lands back over to the state, and then I would consider it. But until that happens, I don't see any reasonable basis this isn't going to happen.
Mr. Gray.
I'm very passionate on this issue. I believe that federal lands should be turned back over to the states as was promised to us at our statehood. It's in our state constitution that the federal government would act as a trustee over these lands. We would clear title until, they would be a trustee, meaning that they would be turned back over to us. These lands are worth untold amounts of money, and they're just sitting there. The federal government owns a great deal of Powder River Basin that could be developed for coal, help us with our mineral revenues, which are leveling off. And I want to talk about a few other things that were brought up here about, this is a new bureaucracy that's going to have to be created. Well, you know what? Then we'll have this debate once the lands are turned over, and we can throw out the legislators who aren't managing them correctly. And then it becomes a local issue, which is the way it should be. Our federal government can't even balance a budget. There's $17 trillion in debt, $150 trillion in unfunded obligations, and yet some of the people here believe that they are better
You're out of
administrators
time.
of this land. That's wrong.
Ms. Brown.
Well, I can see pros and cons on both sides of this, so I'm not sure how we should go about deciding if they should be turned back over to us. I think we need to have more information on this subject before we decide to do that, to see which would be better, if the federal government's better at managing them or if we are. But I do agree that we need to have more control over our lands here in Wyoming because the federal government should not be allowed to tell us what we can do on our land.
Mr. Flesvig.
I would support a measure, much like Utah does, to take back our federal lands. How quick we forget Yellowstone, roadblocks from the federal and the budgetary issues they had. We saw the overreach again at the federal level. Rushmore, Yellowstone, and the list goes on. Land can be better managed in Cheyenne. That people in D.C. don't know how to manage land out here, so thanks.
Thank you. We'll start this question with Mr. Gray. 96% of Wyoming's solid waste landfills are leaking into and contaminating groundwater. In the last two sessions, the legislature tried to address the issue with a bill that essentially talked about ceasing, transferring, and remediation of those landfills. Unfortunately, the wording in the legislation exempts the majority of governmental entities from complying. Would you readdress the leaking landfill issue if you were in the legislature?
I'm not super familiar with this issue. I want to hear the testimony. It's very important that I think for you to realize that I approach this as someone who's not an incumbent with my principles, and it's very important on these specific industry issues to hear the testimony when you go down to Cheyenne. But my initial feeling based on your description is that's wrong. That's favoring government and not keeping them accountable, which you'd never want to do. It's similar to the examples of where the state legislature, which is a question we haven't gotten into tonight, gives grants to private businesses, chooses winners and losers. Well, in this instance, government's the winner. And I think that's wrong to choose favorites. Everybody should be on a level playing field, including government.
Ms. Brown.
I agree with what he said. I mean, he has a good point there, and the government needs to be held to the same standards as we'd hold a private company to. So, yeah, I think I would check into revisiting this issue.
Mr. Flesvig.
I'm too not up to speed on the issue in its entirety. As a representative, I would definitely look into it, get researched on it, and listen to my constituency and move forward with it. Thanks.
Ms. Linn.
I wasn't aware of that, so that's new to me as well. I think you said 96%, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, if 96% of our groundwater is having trash and refuse leaking into it, that would be a concern of mine as a legislator as well as a citizen. So, yes, I would definitely want to look into it. As with what Chuck said, I would want to know what is the evidence, how do we know that this is actually happening, and to what degree is it happening, what is the risk to the public. You know, I think we're reaching a point in our evolution as a nation, being 230 years old, that, you know, we probably have been remiss in some areas, and we need to really take a look at our basic infrastructure, from whether we're talking about this issue or our roads and things like that. You know, we've taken so much for granted, and there's just so much responsibility that we have to be responsible for. I know that was a redundant statement, but yeah, this is very concerning.
Your time is up. Mr. Walters.
Thank you. This is an issue that is ongoing in the legislature. It has been funded the last couple of years. It continues to be researched and funded. What has happened is over the last several hundred years, every municipality had a city dump, and every city dump, none of them were lined 50 or 60 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or 10 years ago. People did not realize this was going to become an issue. And suddenly we started to see a negative effect. And so small municipalities, small county governments with single-digit and double-digit, maybe a $20,000 annual budget can't afford a $30 million project. And so the state of Wyoming has stepped in and started to help those various communities address this problem. So the first thing you do is you say, hey, let's stop adding to the problem. So that means that's the cease part of it. Stop putting your garbage out in that location. So we've gone into these communities, we've started to have them bail up their stuff, haul it to larger landfills that have already been lined, that have been taken care of. And it's an ongoing project. It didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be solved overnight, but it is being worked on.
Mr. Opella.
As Mr. Walters stated, that's what's happening here in Casper. We became a regional landfill. People bail their stuff and bring it into us, and I think the state will be using some of its fund at some time to help shut down all these illegal, or whatever you call it, what do you say? Not illegal, I guess you should say. The cease part. Right. To start shutting some of these things down. But that's the only way to do it. We've done it here in Casper. We got money. One of our years was consensus funding. We used it with all the other communities and went in and got the lining, got a bunch of land. So we're ready to go. But that's the only way you can do it. Stop it, put groundwater monitoring in, and obey the rules.
Ms. Longtine.
Yeah, I can't really add a whole lot to what Mr. Walters and Mr. Opella have said. You know, we have been going, it's been an issue, I think, and we've been discussing it in the press for about 10 years now, off and on, and have been moving toward the regional facility approach, because many small communities can't afford to go in and line and operate compliant facilities that don't pollute their groundwater. And so I would like to see us to continue along that way. But the other part of this that no one seems to be working on, or I have to take that back. The community of Buffalo is very proactive on this. I was really impressed with what the community of Buffalo was doing, and even little places like Kimmer are doing, which is they're encouraging us to throw less away in the first place by instituting recycling programs. Gillette has curbside recycling. Cheyenne has curbside recycling. The less you throw away, the less winds up in the landfill.
Time's up. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Yeah, I tend to agree that the first thing that we have to be cognizant of is protecting health and human safety. And so, and Mr. Walters is exactly right. You see this in a lot of smaller communities. We're a very rural state, and communities can't afford to close and remediate these sites. And so I think that there's a position for the state to step in and provide funding to these municipalities, to these smaller towns, to deal with this problem. And I'm somewhat familiar with the situation in Casper going to a regional landfill. And I think to see that trend progress, we're going to need some state involvement. These are very complicated issues when the problem has accrued over 50 or 60 years or more. It's not going to be solved overnight, but I think that the state needs to be proactive and continue to fund these projects for the smaller municipalities that can't do it on their own.
Thank you. Many states have enacted legislation conferring legal status on same-sex unions. Would you favor legislation in Wyoming to support civil unions? Let's start with Mr. Opella.
No. Thank you.
Ms. Longtine?
I would not favor legislation to support civil unions. I would support legislation to recognize same-sex marriage. As we have grown up as people and as a nation, we have come to realize that just like the miscegenation laws of the 50s, 60s, and even into the 80s were wrong and were a civil rights issue, also, this is a civil rights issue. Who you love should not determine how many rights you have in your state or in your country.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. I would support marriage equality. I shy away from the term civil unions. I think that everyone should have equal rights before the law. Doesn't matter who you choose to be your partner, who you choose to love. And frankly, as we see decision after decision coming down in the 10th Circuit and federal district courts all over the United States, whether or not the Wyoming legislature chooses to act and do the right thing may be moot, because there's a continuing recognition that the current system is unequal. And we're the equality state, okay? And so let's make it equal for everyone.
Mr. Gray?
I do not support civil unions or same-sex marriage. I support neither.
Ms. Brown?
I believe that everybody should have the same opportunities and equality under the law, whether we or what religion we are, or race, or sexual orientation. I've known lots of gay people, and just like the rest of us, there's good, there's bad, and there's in between. So I think they deserve all the rights that we have. And it says in the Bible, judge not, ye shall be judged. So I don't judge them. As long as they don't ask me to live their lifestyle, I'm not going to try to make them live mine.
Mr. Flesvig?
I do not support same-sex marriage or civil unions. Rights can't be granted on acts of behavior. Thanks.
Ms. Linn?
I think marriage is an institution of the church, and I regret that it was put into the public arena. I don't think that marriage is something that the state should have any regulating ability over, and I don't know how we extricate ourselves from it now. I just know that I don't want to discriminate against anybody or judge anybody, but nor do I want them to take away what marriage is to me and has been my whole life and for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years prior to that. So I would hope that we could find some way to address this, because I think it is a really important issue.
Mr. Walters?
I do not support civil unions.
We're only going to have time for a few more questions. We want to be sure we leave time for each of you to have a closing statement, and also because we have 7 candidates who submitted statements to be read, we'll need to leave time at the end for them. I'm sorry that cuts into our questioning time a bit, but that's the agreement we reached with the absent candidates. So,
may we vote on that?
Well, unfortunately, they were given that option, and they're not here to vote. So I think we, in an effort of fairness, I think we just need to go with it. So this will be your last question, and we'll start with Mr. Gray. As a legislator, how will you interact with colleagues with whom you have significant ideological differences? Is staying true to your political philosophy more important to you than compromising to reach a solution?
Oh, I believe it's very important to stand up for what you believe in. I'm going to stand up and shake everybody's hand here tonight. I don't agree with everybody. It's very easy to be civil. It's also very important, but also to stand up for what you believe in. And I think it's very important to put principle before politics and put principle before backslapping, but to be respectful, but not to become part of the what has been called the good old boy system down in Cheyenne, and maybe that may not be. I believe it is a good way to think about it. I mean, because it becomes a revolving door where it's just a city of influence and of people granting favors to each other and becoming, in some instances, wealthy in the city based on having suddenly influence. I think that's wrong, and I believe that we should. I believe standing for what you believe in.
Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, we're coming back this way. All right. My entire campaign is predicated on the fact that I want to go down there and cooperate, collaborate, work with any legislature, any stakeholder, regardless of party affiliation. So the answer is yes. I absolutely will work diligently with those folks. Now, does that mean that you don't have principles, that you don't have beliefs? Of course, that doesn't mean that. I'm going to go down there with ideas. And everything in this country, democracy only works if you have an exchange of ideas, if you work together. And it's through that process that you get better ideas. I mean, I'm not going to stand before anyone and say, I've got the answer to everything, because that would be foolish. But together with a group of other legislators who have differing opinions, differing point of views, together we can forge good solutions for the people of Wyoming. And above politics, above ideology, that's what we need to remember. We're here to serve the people in our communities, in our state, and they must remain first and foremost.
Thank you. Ms. Longtine?
I'm really tempted to just say ditto, because that really sums it up. Yes, as a legislator, my first responsibility is to my constituency, and therefore it is my job to try and work with everyone to reach the best solutions, which frequently may mean compromising on some of my hard-held beliefs. But that's what statesmanship is all about, and that's what we really need in Cheyenne, is we need a little more statesmanship and a little less politics, so that we can all have civil discussions and come to solutions for problems that are frequently complex and difficult, that serve the people of Wyoming instead of serving our parties.
Thank you. Mr. Opella?
Well, after many years on the city council, the commission, highway commission, I've learned a long time ago, you got to get along with people, you got to talk to them, you got to be civil to them if you want to get anything done. Nothing's going to change unless you can talk to your constituents and the people you've got to go down to Cheyenne with. So that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Walters?
Legislating is about simple mathematics in the state of Wyoming. You must have 31 votes in the House. You must have 16 votes in the Senate. You must get the governor on board to sign your legislation. And then you have accomplished something. So to do that, you have to get along. You have to listen to people from all differing points of view. And in the end, it makes any bill even a better bill, because you have heard all of those, had all of that input and heard all of those points of view. And so to get along is a good thing. Compromise is not a bad word. Compromise means that you're willing to discuss other ideas and willing to make something even better that was your original idea. So I think that that's vital. I've got 2 years under my belt of doing that. I've been able to get along with folks. I've been able to move pieces of legislation along, and it's worked very well. And so I would continue to do that in the future.
Ms. Linn?
There are some things that I would not ever compromise, and I'll be very straightforward about those. I'm pro-life. I will not compromise on any bill that has to do with life. That's a conviction that's deeply held for me, and I can't compromise that. much like our founding documents say, I believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty to me is represented in our founding documents, and those are under attack today. Some people think it's no big deal to violate a state or a federal constitution. It is a big deal. Those are based on natural law that comes from God that protects everyone, not just Christians, not just any religion. They are there to protect all of us. Other than that, I am very, very much somebody who reaches across the aisle to people that disagree with me, and some of my best friends, in fact, are of the opposite major party, and who we have violent, sometimes violent in a sense, disagreement about matters, but we respect each other, and they've written me endorsements for this campaign, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Mr. Flesvig.
In Cheyenne, there is a lot of the get along to go along mantra. You see that in the liberal establishment down there. So I will not waver for liberty, freedom, personal responsibility. I will hold steadfast and true to those principles at all costs. For that, that's the commitment I make to the people of House District 37. Thank you.
And Ms. Brown.
Well, I think that we need to be able to listen to other people's ideas and their point of view. I have a social work major, which makes it so that I know how to look at other people's points of view. And if you think you're always right and you're not willing to listen to somebody else, then you're fooling yourself as well as everybody around you. So I think we really need to get along with each other, but we do need to stand our ground on the important things. And I want to be the one that listens to what my constituents want and do what they want to do, not what my political party wants me to do.
Thank you. Okay, this is your chance to wrap things up. You have 2 minutes to say whatever you think was not said, or whatever you think the audience wants to take home from what you've had to say. I'd also remind everyone that this is being videoed, so it will be on the library's website, and others will be able to check in and see what you had to say. So let's start with Ms. Brown. We'll let her begin wrapping up, and then when all the candidates are finished, then I'll read the statements from the candidates who could not come tonight. Ms. Brown.
Well, I don't know what else to say, except that I just want to be the person that gets to represent the people of Wyoming, to do what they want me to do, to listen to them, and to be the best politician out there that I can be, because I don't want to be the person that goes down there and votes strictly for one political party or the other. I want to be the one that does what is right for everybody, not just one person.
Mr. Flesvig.
In conclusion, I'd like to thank League of Women Voters, and I'm very impressed with the turnout of such involved voters out here. The turnout is just amazing. In conclusion, I just like to say I just hold steadfast to my principles. I just want to go down there, listen to my constituency, and just better represent them. My opponent is, with I hate being it to death, but SF 104 is an unconstitutional law. It was ruled, and his involvement, his heavy-handed involvement in that, just cannot go unchecked. He did not represent District 37, and that's why I sit here in front of you tonight. Thank you.
Ms. Linn.
I'm somebody who has a passion for representing people in a self-governance, in a society that allows for self-governance. I have a passion for learning and teaching and looking for better ways to do things and better ways to communicate with people and making my community a better place to be. I think that we are in a position in Wyoming where we really need additional voices within our state legislature. We need more diversity. I think we need more women who are good women to be serving in there with the men. We need to really truly be the equality state. We've heard some challenges from down the table tonight about that, and I agree. There are some areas where we could do better at being the equality state and really leading instead of following. Many of the legislative issues that came out of the last couple sessions were things that we were sold because, well, everybody else is doing this, so Wyoming needs to do it too. I am not a follower. I'm a leader. I'm not always right, and I don't know everything. I have a tremendous amount that I need to still learn. But I will be the best student of Wyoming issues if I'm elected. I will never vote for something if I don't have time to read it and study it. I will never tell a Wyoming person that they're not smart enough or not capable enough of being involved in the discussion about what's going on. And I will fight for the rights and the best interests of Wyoming people with the tenacity of a Yellowstone mama bear. Thank you.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. Again, I'm Tom Walters, running for House District 38, and I would ask for your vote in August and again in November. The reason you should vote for me at that time is I am directly connected to Wyoming's big three industries. I am a rancher, so I have a direct connection to agriculture. My family is directly involved in the oil and gas industry in the state of Wyoming, and we have cycled the boom and bust cycle many times, so we know that roller coaster well. Also very connected to the tourism industry through hotel businesses throughout the state of Wyoming. So I feel the impact from a family level of everything that goes on in the state of Wyoming, from agriculture to energy to tourism. And so I feel like I have a good grasp on how that is affecting the state of Wyoming and the people in Wyoming. As an elected person in the State House of Representatives, I've worked to limit regulation on private liberty as well as private industry. I've also worked hard to continue our savings growth, as I think that that's going to be the key to helping iron out the boom and bust cycle of Wyoming. So again, Tom Walters for House District 38, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Opella.
Yes, I'm running in House District 35. I'm running against the incumbent. And with my 2 minutes, 1 minute, whatever I have, I would like to correct a couple of things that have been said about me for the record. My opponent sent out a letter that said while on the council and the commission, I was a tax and spend person. Well, if anybody knows anything about the city council and the Natrona County Commission, they don't have any taxing authority whatsoever. So I would like to correct that at least. Second thing, which is important to me, is there's been a rumor that I'm anti-Second Amendment. Well, I'm an ex-Marine. I belong to the NRA. I've been to Vietnam. I got a concealed carry permit. I don't know what else I need to tell anybody other than that I am not against the Second Amendment. Other than that, I'd sure like to have your vote. Remember, then the 19th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Opella. Ms. Longtine.
Well, thank you, Carol and Nicole, for putting this all together, and Bill, and bringing us all here. It's been an interesting evening. There have been some very thought-provoking and provocative statements. I think I've learned a few things, which is always good, because I think as legislators, we need to always have open minds and be trying to learn new things so that we can have a collaborative approach to legislating. Since I'm running for House District 59, I would really like the opportunity to represent the interests of the people who live in my district. Many who work multiple part-time jobs and can't afford health care. Many who are single parent women and aren't making a living wage. Many who have children in our schools and are being fed a real bill of goods about the next generation science standards and the Common Core curricula. So I would like to be able to go down there and perhaps be a voice of reason and maybe bring some different information and perspective to the whole process.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Carol. I'd also like to thank the library and the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to appear before all of you tonight. I've been watching, and I think everybody's still awake, so I applaud you for that. I know listening to a bunch of politicians can sometimes go on and on and on, but this is a really important venue for you to come to, because this is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to democracy. And you've heard a little bit about me and some of my ideas and positions on issues. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with tonight, is that if I'm elected, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to work hard for my constituents. I'm going to listen. I'm going to make decisions based on facts. It's not going to be based on ideology. I'm going to reach across the aisle. I'm going to work with whoever else is down there and keep the people of Wyoming first and foremost in my mind. and make the decisions that benefit them. Doesn't matter if the issue is education, if it's healthcare, if it's issues pertaining to our oil and gas or extractive industries. That's the approach I'm going to take. So you know what you're going to get from me in terms of effort and in terms of approach. And I think that it will help bring a little bit different perspective to the legislature. And as I talked about, when you have competing ideas, sometimes the end product that you get at the end is better than the two ingredients that got put in the front. So I would ask for your vote as I am running for House District 36 in the primary and then again in November in the general election. Thank you.
And Mr. Gray.
My opponent, Mr. Lockhart, he's the longest serving member of the Wyoming House of Representatives. He's been there since the year 2000, and he's responsible for his record. He truly is. And he voted for all the budgets, which tripled spending since the year 2002, and then once the general fund surplus was wasted away, voted for the gas tax increase. He voted for strategies like we discussed here today of moving agency budgets to the general fund, which is why we get into the pickles we talked about. I believe tax increases are wrong. We have plenty of revenues in this state. He voted for the unconstitutional SF 104 using any means necessary to achieve the ends they wanted, when it's clear in the state constitution. It states that the superintendent shall have general supervision over the public schools. He voted against introducing a bill to get us out of the Common Core. He's responsible for his record. And when there's no record to stand on, all you focus on is your history or your business history, which is fine. It's very good to have a good business history and to have a background and to be from an area, but if you're not articulating those Wyoming values and voting that way, that's wrong. We need to be responsible with our budgets. We need to not be increasing taxes. That's the Wyoming way. And I think it's unfortunate that a little bit that we aren't able to respond to the statements, because last time my opponent used his last statement, I didn't have a response to say that I was throwing grenades. Priority-based budgeting is not a grenade, and trying to characterize it that way is very unfortunate. I think it's an unfortunate comment. That's about prioritizing, doing budgeting right, doing budgeting in a way that we fund the first things first, the most important things first, and go down and evaluate in a collaborative way. That's not a grenade, and I think it's very unfortunate that the need to characterize things that way is being used in this race. I'm a conservative, I'm a small business person, I see the effects of regulations every day, and I'd really appreciate your vote on August 19th. It's a chance for us to hold politicians accountable for the records.
Thank you, all of you. All of these statements are varying lengths. I'm going to hold the statements to 2 minutes, just like I held you to 2 minutes, so Nicole will stop me in mid-sentence and I will try to read quickly enough that I'm not cutting off anyone's words. This is from Gerald Gay. Thank you, Betsy, and all who have attended this function. I am in Thermopolis attending Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee hearings the next 2 days, so please accept my regrets for not attending this meeting at the Natrona County Library. Since I am not available to hear the questions the audience will ask, allow me to ask and answer a few questions that should be on every voter's mind this season. In 2013, Senate File 104 stripped elected Superintendent of Public Instruction Cindy Hill of her duties. Senate File 104 was later determined unconstitutional by the Wyoming Supreme Court. I did not vote for Senate File 104. My question is this: how many of you supported Senate File 104? How many opposed the return of the superintendent after the High Court ruled it unconstitutional? How many of you stand for more transparency in government, as I do? I believe that the Attorney General, who right now serves at the pleasure of the governor, should be accountable to the citizens of Wyoming. How many of you support making the Attorney General's position an elected position? I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. How many of you agree? God bless Wyoming, and thank you for allowing me to speak. The next statement is from Steve Harshman. Thank you to the Natrona County Public Library and the League of Women Voters for sponsoring tonight's candidate forum. I regret that I am unable to join you tonight, as I am camped out at the base of Laramie Peak with 30 senior football players at our annual Camp Victory Leadership Retreat. It is an opportunity for us to visit about real things, build trust, and cement relationships that will last a lifetime. Thank you for the opportunity to represent you in the Wyoming State House District 37. As a parent and citizen, I am humbled by your trust and confidence. I've worked hard to do my very best to represent you with common sense on issues that affect all of us. I was born in Casper and raised in Midwest. It has been a blessing to work and raise our 4 children in Casper. As a native Wyoming son, I am committed to preserve and enhance our unique quality of life. There are hundreds of important issues that need constant attention, and I have a strong conservative record of leadership on every issue in our Republican Party platform. My record of getting things done is represented in the Hathaway Scholarship, full-day kindergarten, the rebuilding of our schools in Casper, the maintenance of the Family Practice Center that had over 20,000 doctor visits last year, and the tripling of our savings and investments at the state level with my 4x10 plan and 8x18 plan for the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. I am 100% on life and family issues and have consistently and most recently received an A rating from the NRA and Second Amendment sportsmanship issues. As chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I can tell you that the largest growth in our state government has been in savings, construction, and grants to local communities. And there's several more paragraphs, but we won't read those. This is from Bill Landon. First of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Natrona County Public Library staff for making this evening possible. I regret that I cannot attend tonight because of a previous commitment. I agreed some time ago to attend a fundraiser for the Congressional Scholarship Award, which helps to send Wyoming high school students to Washington, D.C. for internships and the opportunity to learn about government. For the past 7 years, I have been honored and privileged to represent East Casper and Evansville in the Wyoming Senate. My passion for the job has never waned. My appointment and election to the Senate followed my many years of volunteer service and leadership in our community. I served as president of Kiwanis and the YMCA board, chaired Chamber of Commerce committees, and helped to bring the College National Finals Rodeo and other culminating events to Casper. I have always tried to give as much time as I can to make our community a better place to live. I am proud of my work in the state Senate. The past 2 sessions, I have sponsored and passed bills that have helped our neighbors and friends right here in Casper. Those bills fixed unemployment law and helped get government out of the way of small business mental health providers. I have stood up for seniors, veterans, and sportsmen. With my experience in the Senate, a deep love for Wyoming, and a clear understanding of the tasks ahead, I believe I am the right choice for District 27. I have always believed in limited government, in saving for tomorrow, and a common sense approach to Wyoming issues. I sincerely thank the voters for the opportunity to serve, and I want to thank those in attendance tonight. This one is from Tom Lockhart. As I indicated earlier, I would provide a short statement for Carol's use. I had already scheduled a meeting Monday evening before I had the League of Women Voters candidate forum schedule. I regret not being able to participate, as I believe I have participated in all of the forums since 2000. Please share my regrets to all in attendance. Please thank the League of Women Voters present and those with our Casper Library for all they have done for the forum. I am running for re-election in House District 57 and would like to thank the House District 57 voters for their long-term support. While there are many issues that legislators work and vote on, the legislative's goals should always remain the same. Pass the best possible laws for Wyoming long-term. I've served on multiple legislative committees, which provides a broad background in state issues. In the past 8 years, I've been House Chairman of the Minerals, Business, and Economic Development Committee, which is very broad and important to Wyoming. The records will show that this committee has a very high number of bills passed and signed into law. It is estimated that legislators with my length of service have made 13,000 votes, most of which have been good for Wyoming. Thank you again for allowing me a read statement, and wish I could have been 2 places at once. This one is from Drew Perkins. First, let me extend my appreciation to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event and the courtesy for allowing a statement to be read on my behalf. I apologize for not attending, but had a prior out-of-town commitment for the first half of this week. For the last 8 years, the people of Natrona County have counted on me to represent them in the Wyoming Senate. It has been an honor. If you review my voting record, it reflects a record of reasonable conservatism on issues that matter, like the economy, jobs, energy, education, and other important issues, all while keeping Wyoming's books balanced. My record shows I have been effective and successful in bringing legislation on matters as diverse as the development of new energy sources in Wyoming, protecting the property rights of contractors, providing effective deterrence to DUIs, strengthening grandparent visitation rights, and preserving end-of-life choices. I have a strong record of defending property rights and our civil liberties, especially those in the Bill of Rights and the Wyoming Constitution. I have a record and a reputation of analyzing and, when necessary, opposing or amending legislation to protect the free exercise of faith, family, and freedom, while still representing the rights of others to live their lives as they choose. My record also reflects consistent opposition to higher taxes and the hidden costs of fees and regulations that can hurt low and fixed income families. My background and experience as a business and tax lawyer and CPA provide me with the education and experience to understand how businesses and families prosper. I have successfully applied that experience and those skills and this one is from Tom Reeder. Tom Reeder is running for re-election in House District 58. Appointed in 2011 and elected in 2012, I would be willing and honored to represent the people for 2 more years. Transparency, accountability, access, and communication are so important in trying to make the right decision. With the help of my webpage, www.treaderhd58.com, getting that information to the people is very important with current issues, news, calendar, media, contact information, link to the live sessions, voting records, and biography. The issues in front of us, 93 assigned by Management Council alone to study during the interim, then throw in Common Core, NGSS, marijuana, repealing the gas tax, appoint or elect the state superintendent, federal lands, Agenda 21, Medicaid, to name a few more. It is vital to have your representative and senator hear and listen to you. It is your voice we carry. The issues of most concern today, this is a question that if you ask 10 people, you will get 10 different answers. The issues of life, liberty, and property are the ones that concern me the most. The other issues can be handled if we would look for the problem that created it. Writing another law only adds a layer or a Band-Aid, which only complicates problems. Another law only adds to more spending. To outline my top goals, my number 1 goal is to represent the people who've entrusted me to do so. Other goals would be to support family values, pro-life, education, defend our Constitution, voice for veterans and seniors, jobs and economy, healthcare rights. And this statement is from Mr. Stubson, and it's the last one. And it's short. Yes, it is. One of the beauties of our system in Wyoming is that we have a true citizen legislature. After our time in Cheyenne, we each return to our families, our jobs, and our neighbors. The advantage of this system is that it ensures we don't lose touch with those we serve. The disadvantage is that sometimes the obligations to our jobs or our families preclude our participation in events like tonight's forum. Tonight I am sorry to miss the forum because I am out of town for work obligations. I recognize the tremendous honor and responsibility that it is to serve the voters of House District 56. I have worked hard to control budgets while focusing on policies that help our communities, our families, and our businesses thrive. The voters who reach out to me urge me to pursue a government that is limited, efficient, and effective. I've been working very hard to do just that. There are many things that we can take pride in as a state. We have among the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Our state stands on solid fiscal ground, and we see significant steps toward diversifying our economy. There are, however, significant clouds on the horizon. Federal actions threatens to undermine our ability to capitalize on our state's numerous resources. Increased regulatory burdens threaten to suffocate the free market. We in Wyoming need to continue to fight for our right to control our own future. I have a proven record in that fight. I want to continue that work on your behalf and would appreciate your vote on August 19th and November the 4th. And that concludes the written statements and the forum for this evening. I would urge all of you to hang around, talk to the wonderful crowd that we had in attendance tonight. Thank you very much for your patience and for coming. Also, thank you to the audience. This is our third week in a row with a Monday night forum, and we all appreciate how many people came. Thank you.